Chapter 1. The Housekeeper's Final Confession. It is with some hesitation that I set pen to paper concerning the singular events which came to be known in our records as the Housekeeper's Final Confession. There are aspects of the affair which, even now, many years later, retain a peculiar power to disturb me, not because of any violence or horror, though there was enough of both, but because the case exposed the extraordinary lengths to which ordinary people may go when burdened by guilt, fear, and loyalty. The matter first came before Sherlock Holmes during the bleak winter of 1894. London lay beneath a mantle of damp fog that December. The gas lamps glowed like blurred stars through the mist, and the pavements of Baker Street shone with recent rain. Holmes had spent much of the previous week in one of those moods of restless inactivity which I always found alarming. His violin lay neglected upon the chair. Chemical apparatus occupied every available surface. Newspapers, folded and marked with blue pencil, were scattered across the carpet. My friend himself reclined upon the sofa, his long fingers pressed together beneath his chin. "You are bored, Holmes," I remarked. "I am dying of boredom, Watson." "Then surely London can provide some criminal enterprise worthy of your attention." He snorted softly. "London provides crimes in abundance. What it lacks is imagination. 3 cases of embezzlement, 2 jealous husbands, and 1 fraudulent spiritualist. The city appears determined to disappoint me." I had just settled into my chair with a medical journal when Mrs. Hudson entered. "There is a gentleman to see you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes sat upright immediately. "A client?" "I believe so, sir." "Then London may yet redeem itself." A moment later, our visitor was shown into the room. He was a tall man of about 50 years, heavily built, with silver hair and a face marked by deep lines of worry. His clothing was expensive but carelessly worn, as though recent anxieties had made him indifferent to appearances. The gentleman carried a sealed envelope. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked. "I am he. My name is Reginald Ashcombe." Holmes motioned him toward a chair. "Pray sit down, Mr. Ashcombe. You appear troubled." The man obeyed. "Troubled is an inadequate word, Mr. Holmes. Then perhaps you had better begin at the beginning." Our visitor drew a breath. "I own Blackthorn Manor in Hertfordshire." Holmes closed his eyes. "A country estate dating from the late Georgian period. Red brick, extensive grounds, a lake to the eastern side." Mr. Ashcombe stared. "Good heavens! Have you visited it?" "No." "Then how?" "The mud upon your boots is red clay, characteristic of that district. Your cuff bears traces of reed pollen, suggesting water nearby. The architectural journal protruding from your coat pocket reviewed Blackthorn Manor 6 months ago. Continue." The effect upon our visitor was remarkable. For the first time since entering the room, he smiled faintly. "I see your reputation is deserved." Holmes waved the compliment aside. "The problem?" "Yes." Mr. Ashcombe handed him the envelope. Holmes examined the handwriting before opening it. Inside lay a single sheet of paper. He read it once, then again. A curious expression crossed his face. Without speaking, he handed it to me. The message consisted of only 3 sentences. "I can no longer bear the burden of what I have done. The truth lies beneath the 3rd stone. God forgive me." The note was signed, Eleanor Briggs. I looked up, and who is Eleanor Briggs? Mr. Ashcombe's expression darkened. "She was my housekeeper." "Was?" "She died 3 days ago." A silence followed. Holmes leaned forward. "How did she die?" "The physician recorded heart failure." "And this note was discovered after her death?" "Yes." "Where?" "In her room." Holmes tapped the paper thoughtfully. "And what precisely troubles you?" Mr. Ashcombe hesitated. "Because Eleanor Briggs had served my family for nearly 30 years. "Go on." "Because she was honest beyond question." "Continue." "And because she disappeared for an hour on the night my brother vanished." Holmes's eyes opened sharply. "Your brother vanished?" 8 years ago." Now the room seemed suddenly colder. I noticed Holmes become completely still. Whenever he adopted that posture, I knew his mind had seized upon something important. "Tell us everything," he said quietly. Mr. Ashcombe nodded. "My younger brother, Jonathan Ashcombe, lived with me at Blackthorn Manor. He was unmarried and managed much of the estate's business." He paused. "One November evening he left the house after supper." "And never returned?" I asked. "Never." "What explanation was offered?" "We searched for weeks. The police suspected accident or suicide." Holmes frowned. "Without evidence?" "There was very little evidence of any kind." "Interesting," Mr. Ashcombe continued. "The grounds were examined, the nearby villages questioned, rivers dragged, nothing was found." "And Eleanor Briggs?" The man shifted uneasily. "One servant reported seeing her near the old garden wall shortly after midnight." "Was that unusual?" "Very." "Why?" "Because she later claimed to have retired at 10 o'clock. Holmes steepled his fingers. "A discrepancy." "Yes." "Was she questioned?" "Repeatedly." "And?" "She denied leaving her room." Holmes nodded slowly. "What happened afterward?" "The matter faded. My brother was declared legally dead after several years. And now the housekeeper leaves a confession." "Exactly." Holmes rose and crossed to the window. Outside, the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. "The truth lies beneath the third stone," he murmured. "That phrase means nothing to me," said Mr. Ashcombe. "It may mean everything." I observed Holmes carefully. His excitement was unmistakable. "The note was written recently, so far as we can tell, and no explanation accompanied it." "None." Holmes turned. "You mentioned that Eleanor Briggs died 3 days ago." "Yes." "Where is she buried?" "She has not yet been buried. The funeral is tomorrow." A curious light entered Holmes's eyes. "Excellent." Mr. Ashcombe blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Nothing. Merely a thought." He resumed his seat. "Tell me about the woman herself." For the next half hour, Mr. Ashcombe described Eleanor Briggs. She had entered service at Blackthorn Manor as a young woman, and eventually risen to the position of head housekeeper. Every servant respected her. Every employer trusted her. She possessed a reputation for honesty so complete that no one had ever questioned her word, until now. When the account concluded, Holmes sat in silence. Finally he spoke. "Mr. Ashcombe, I shall accompany you to Blackthorn Manor tomorrow." Relief flooded the man's features. "Then you will take the case?" "Most certainly." "Do you already suspect what the confession means?" Holmes smiled faintly. "I suspect many things." "And what are they?" "My dear sir, if I shared them now, I should deprive myself of the pleasure of being wrong." For the first time that evening, genuine astonishment appeared upon our visitor's face. When he departed shortly afterward, carrying our promise of assistance, I turned immediately toward Holmes. "Well?" I demanded. "What do you make of it?" He selected his pipe. "A vanished brother, a trusted servant, a deathbed confession, a cryptic message. Yes. The ingredients are promising. You have a theory?" "Not yet. But surely the note suggests guilt. It suggests the appearance of guilt, which is not the same thing." "Precisely." Holmes lit the pipe and stared into the fire. "There is something deeply curious here, Watson." "What?" "The timing. The timing of the confession." "Exactly. Why wait 8 years?" I considered the question. "I cannot say. Nor can I." A slow smile appeared upon his face. "But I fully intend to discover the answer." As the wind rattled the windows of Baker Street and the fog thickened over London, neither of us could have guessed that by the week's end we would uncover a secret buried not merely beneath stone, but beneath nearly a decade of carefully maintained deception. And at the centre of it all stood a dead housekeeper whose final words would lead us toward murder, betrayal, and a truth no one at Blackthorn Manor was prepared to face. Chapter 2. The Journey to Blackthorn Manor. The following morning broke cold and colourless, with a pale winter sun struggling through a veil of cloud. Holmes and I departed London shortly after breakfast, taking the morning train from King's Cross toward Hertfordshire. Throughout the journey, my companion displayed one of those moods which I had learned to recognize as a sign of intense mental activity. He spoke little, smoked continuously, and spent long intervals gazing through the carriage window at the passing countryside. At length I laid aside my newspaper. "You are unusually silent, Holmes." "I am arranging facts." "We possess very few facts, which makes proper arrangement all the more essential." I smiled. "Then perhaps you can arrange them aloud for my benefit." Holmes removed his pipe. "Very well, Watson. Let us review the matter." He held up one finger. 8 years ago, Jonathan Ashcombe vanished. A second finger joined the first. The disappearance was never explained. A third. Eleanor Briggs, the housekeeper, may have concealed her movements on the night he vanished. A fourth. She dies after 30 years of impeccable service. And finally, she leaves behind a confession. That seems straightforward enough. Nothing is straightforward. Then where lies the difficulty? Holmes leaned back. "In the wording." "You mean the note?" "Precisely. I recited it from memory. I can no longer bear the burden of what I have done. The truth lies beneath the third stone. God forgive me. Notice what is absent." I considered. "There is no mention of murder." "Excellent. No mention of Jonathan Ashcombe." "Indeed, no explanation whatsoever." Holmes nodded approvingly. "Yet everyone assumes the confession concerns the disappearance. Is that unreasonable?" "It is human." The distinction amused him. "A confession without specifics often reveals less than people imagine." "Then you doubt her guilt?" "I doubt everything." Before I could pursue the matter further, the train began to slow. "We have arrived," Holmes announced. A few minutes later, we stepped onto the small station platform serving the district. Waiting beside a carriage stood Reginald Ashcombe. He greeted us warmly, though I observed that the strain upon his features had only deepened. "I am grateful you came so quickly." "The circumstances warranted speed," Holmes replied. Our luggage was loaded, and we soon set off along a winding country road. The landscape possessed a stark winter beauty. Bare trees stretched skeletal branches toward the grey sky. Frost silvered the fields. Here and there clusters of cottages appeared among rolling hills before vanishing again behind hedgerows. At last the carriage rounded a bend. Blackthorn Manor came into view. Even at a distance the house impressed me. Built of dark red brick, it stood upon a gentle rise overlooking extensive grounds. Tall chimneys rose above the roofline. Long windows reflected the weak sunlight. Though handsome, the building possessed a certain melancholy character, as though years of accumulated secrets lingered within its walls. Holmes studied it attentively. "Interesting. What is?" I asked. "The additions." I looked again. "What additions?" "The western wing was built later than the original structure." I squinted. "I confess I see nothing." "Different brickwork. Slight variation in symmetry." Mr. Ashcombe laughed softly. "You are correct, Mr. Holmes. That wing was added 40 years ago. Just as I thought." Our host regarded him with increasing admiration. We passed through wrought iron gates and approached the house. Several servants awaited our arrival. Their expressions suggested curiosity mixed with apprehension. News of Holmes's involvement had clearly spread. Inside, the manor proved equally impressive. A grand entrance hall opened beneath a sweeping staircase. Portraits of long-dead Ashcombes lined the walls. Dark wood panelling and polished floors reflected generations of wealth. Yet, despite its elegance, an atmosphere of unease hung over the house. I sensed it immediately. The servants moved quietly. Conversations ceased as we approached. Even the air seemed heavy with expectation. "Everyone knows about the confession?" Holmes asked. Mr. Ashcombe sighed. "Unfortunately, yes. And speculation flourishes." "Naturally." "Excellent." Our host stared. "Excellent? Rumours reveal more than facts, Mr. Ashcombe." He appeared uncertain whether Holmes was serious. A maid approached. Mrs. Wilcox is waiting in the drawing room, sir. Thank you, Emily. Holmes glanced toward her retreating figure. Who is Mrs. Wilcox? Eleanor Briggs's successor. The current housekeeper. Yes. Then we shall speak with her immediately. We were led into a spacious drawing room overlooking the grounds. There we found a woman of approximately 50 years. She rose nervously as we entered. Unlike Eleanor Briggs, whom she had succeeded only 3 years earlier, Mrs. Wilcox possessed an anxious disposition that manifested itself in constant hand movements and darting glances. Holmes introduced himself. She nodded. I have heard much about you, Mr. Holmes. I hope none of it true. For a moment she seemed uncertain how to respond. Then Holmes smiled faintly, easing her discomfort. You worked closely with Miss Briggs for several years, and knew her well as anyone. Holmes settled into a chair. Tell me about her. The woman hesitated. She was respected. That is reputation. I asked about the woman. Mrs. Wilcox blinked. After a pause, she answered, she was kind, good, strict, better, proud. Holmes nodded. Now we are making progress. The woman continued. She carried burdens. This caught Holmes's attention immediately. What sort of burdens? I cannot say. Why not? Because she never spoke of them. Holmes leaned forward. Then how do you know they existed? Mrs. Wilcox clasped her hands. Because sometimes I would find her sitting alone. Yes? She would stare into the fire for long periods. And? She looked frightened. The room grew still. Frightened of what? Holmes asked quietly. I don't know. When did this begin? Several years ago. After Jonathan Ashcombe disappeared. She nodded. Yes. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. This was our first genuine connection between the vanished man and the dead housekeeper. What else? Holmes asked. Mrs. Wilcox hesitated. There was one thing. Go on. About 6 months ago, I entered the linen room unexpectedly. And? Eleanor was crying. Mr. Ashcombe looked astonished. Crying? Eleanor? Yes, sir. She never cried. She did that day. Holmes's eyes narrowed. What explanation did she give? None. What was she holding? The woman frowned. A photograph. Every instinct in me sharpened. A photograph of whom? Holmes asked. I could not see clearly. Try. Mrs. Wilcox concentrated. It was a man. Young or old? Middle-aged? Beard? I believe so. Holmes rose. And where is this photograph now? I don't know. For the first time since our arrival, genuine excitement flickered across Holmes's features. A photograph. Tears. Fear. Small details, perhaps. Yet I knew my friend well enough to recognize when apparently insignificant facts had begun forming a pattern in his mind. One final question, he said. When was the last time anyone saw Eleanor Briggs alive? Mrs. Wilcox answered immediately. At 9 o'clock on Tuesday evening. And after that? No one entered her room until Wednesday morning. Why? Because she wished to be left alone. Holmes nodded slowly. Very good. When the woman departed, I turned toward him. You found something. Perhaps. The photograph. Among other things. What does it mean? Holmes crossed to the window. Outside, the winter wind stirred the bare branches of an ancient oak. What interests me, he said quietly, is not what Eleanor Briggs confessed, but what she failed to confess. Before I could question him further, a sharp knock sounded at the door. A footman entered. Beg pardon, sir. Yes? The vicar has arrived. Mr. Ashcombe frowned. The vicar? He says it concerns Miss Briggs. At those words, Holmes turned sharply. Show him in immediately. Something in his voice caused even the servant to look surprised. Moments later, an elderly clergyman entered the room carrying a small leather-bound journal. And before he spoke a single word, I saw that Holmes's attention had become absolute. The old man's expression suggested that he had brought with him a piece of information capable of altering the entire direction of the investigation. I would soon learn how correct that impression was. Chapter 3. The Vicar's Journal. The arrival of the vicar marked the first significant turning point in what had already become a most perplexing affair. The gentleman who entered the drawing room was tall and spare, with silver hair and a weathered face that spoke of many years spent among the concerns of ordinary men and women. His black coat was worn but immaculate, and his steady grey eyes possessed the calm assurance of one accustomed to hearing confessions and keeping difficult secrets. Mr. Ashcombe greeted him immediately. "Good afternoon, Reverend Mercer." "Mr. Ashcombe." The two men shook hands. Holmes observed the newcomer closely. "You wish to discuss Miss Briggs?" The vicar looked toward him. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I presume." "Indeed. I have heard much about your abilities." Holmes inclined his head. "And I suspect you have brought something more useful than compliments." A faint smile crossed the clergyman's face. "I believe I have." He lifted the leather-bound journal. This belonged to Eleanor Briggs. A silence followed. Mr. Ashcombe stared. "Her journal?" "Not exactly." The vicar sat down. "Perhaps I should explain." Holmes motioned for him to continue. 3 months ago, Miss Briggs came to see me. Voluntarily, yes. Was she seeking spiritual guidance? That was her stated purpose. The vicar hesitated, though I believe something else troubled her. What? She wished to confess. I exchanged a glance with Holmes. The old clergyman continued. However, she never completed the confession. "Why not?" asked Holmes. "Because she lost her nerve." The vicar's expression became thoughtful. "I remember the occasion clearly. She arrived pale and visibly distressed. Several times she attempted to explain something, and failed. Repeatedly. What exactly did she say?" The vicar closed his eyes briefly. "As nearly as I can recall, her words were these: 'Reverend, there are truths that become heavier with every passing year.'" Holmes remained motionless. "Anything else?" "One cannot bury the past forever." The room grew silent. The old man opened the journal. "Before leaving, she entrusted this to me." "With instructions?" Holmes asked. "Very specific instructions." "What were they?" The vicar looked around the room. "She told me that if anything happened to her, I was to deliver it directly to Mr. Ashcombe." "When?" "After her death." Holmes nodded slowly. "And you complied?" "Naturally." The journal was handed across. Holmes examined it carefully. The leather cover showed signs of age and frequent handling. Inside were several pages of writing in neat, disciplined handwriting. At first glance, the contents appeared disappointingly ordinary. Household accounts, lists, personal observations, records of parish events, nothing remotely resembling a confession. Holmes turned the pages methodically, then stopped. A curious expression crossed his face. "What is it?" I asked. He pointed. Near the bottom of one page appeared a single sentence, written in a noticeably darker ink than the surrounding entries. "The dead do not always remain where they are placed." The words sent an unexpected chill through me. Mr. Ashcombe frowned. "What does that mean?" "No idea," Holmes replied. Yet I knew him well enough to recognize that he found it deeply significant. The vicar leaned forward. "There is something else." Holmes looked up. "Yes?" During our final conversation, Miss Briggs asked me a peculiar question. "What question?" "Do you believe a person may commit a terrible wrong while attempting to do what is right?" No one spoke. The clergyman continued quietly. I answered that good intentions do not erase consequences. And how did she respond? She said, "That is what I feared." Holmes closed the journal. His eyes had taken on the distant look I associated with intense concentration. The vicar rose. "I am afraid that is all I can offer." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, "you have provided considerably more than you realize." After Reverend Mercer departed, Holmes remained silent for nearly a minute. At last I spoke. "Well," he stood abruptly, "we must inspect Eleanor Briggs's room." "Immediately?" "At once." Mr. Ashcombe led us upstairs. The house seemed unusually quiet as we climbed. Perhaps it was merely my imagination, but I could not shake the feeling that the entire manor was watching us. The room occupied by Eleanor Briggs lay on the third floor overlooking the eastern grounds. Mr. Ashcombe unlocked the door. Nothing appeared disturbed. The chamber was modest but comfortable. A narrow bed stood beside the window. A wardrobe occupied one corner. Several books rested upon a small table. Everything was orderly, meticulously orderly, the sort of order produced by a woman who valued discipline. Holmes began examining the room with characteristic thoroughness. He inspected the desk, the wardrobe, the fireplace, the books, even the underside of the furniture. I wandered toward the window. From there I could see a section of the grounds extending toward a distant stone wall. The winter landscape appeared bleak and silent. Behind me, Holmes suddenly said, "Interesting." I turned. He was kneeling beside the bed. "What have you found?" Without answering, he pointed toward the floorboards. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed faint scratches near one corner of the room. The marks appeared recent. Holmes touched them lightly. Something heavy was moved. Mr. Ashcombe looked puzzled. There has been no reason to move furniture. Nevertheless, something was moved. Holmes examined the surrounding boards. Then he surprised us by lifting a section of carpet. Beneath it lay bare wood, and in the center of that wood was a small circular indentation, as though a metal object had rested there for years. Yet the object itself was gone. "What stood here?" Holmes asked. Mr. Ashcombe frowned. "I don't know. Think carefully." After a moment his eyes widened. "A trunk." Holmes looked up sharply. "A trunk?" "Yes. What became of it?" "I haven't the faintest idea." Mr. Ashcombe appeared genuinely bewildered. "Eleanor owned an old travelling trunk. When did you last see it?" "Months ago." Holmes rose. "And now it has vanished." The implications hung in the air. "Could she have disposed of it?" I suggested. "Possibly. Or someone removed it after her death." Holmes nodded. "Also possible." He moved toward the fireplace. There he crouched again. A few moments later, he held up something small between thumb and forefinger. "What is that?" I asked. "A fragment." He handed it to me. The object appeared to be part of a photograph. Only a corner remained. Most of the image had been destroyed, yet a small section of a man's shoulder and beard was still visible. My pulse quickened. "The photograph Mrs. Wilcox mentioned, perhaps." Holmes examined the burnt edges. "It was destroyed deliberately. Recently, within days." Mr. Ashcombe stared at the fragment. "I don't recognize it." Holmes placed it carefully into his pocket. Then he approached the desk. Several drawers contained ordinary correspondence, nothing remarkable, until he opened the final drawer. Inside lay a folded sheet of paper, yellowed with age. Holmes unfolded it. For the first time since arriving at Blackthorn Manor, I saw genuine surprise flash across his face. "What is it?" I asked. Without a word, he handed it to me. The paper contained only a list of names, 6 names, each crossed out in ink, except one. That final name remained untouched. I read it aloud. "Jonathan Ashcombe." The room became silent. Mr. Ashcombe stared. "My brother's name?" Holmes took back the paper. "Curious." "Curious," I exclaimed. "It is far more than curious. Quite right." His voice had grown thoughtful. "Which is precisely why I wish to know who the other 5 names belong to." He folded the paper carefully. "What do you mean?" "Because, Watson, this is not a list of people." "What is it then?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "I strongly suspect it is a list of events." I opened my mouth to question him further. Before I could do so, a sudden cry echoed from somewhere below. The sound was unmistakable. A woman's scream. All 3 of us froze. Then another scream followed. This one louder, more terrified. Holmes reached the door first. "What happened?" I shouted. A servant's panicked voice echoed from downstairs. "Someone has opened the old family crypt." For the briefest instant, I saw something remarkable. Sherlock Holmes smiled, not from amusement, not from cruelty, but from the unmistakable excitement of a man who had just seen the first glimpse of a hidden truth emerging from darkness. And without another word, he raced toward the staircase. Chapter 4. The Disturbed Crypt. Holmes reached the lower hall with such speed that I scarcely managed to keep pace with him. Servants were gathered near the rear entrance, speaking over one another in frightened voices. Several maids appeared genuinely alarmed, while a pair of footmen stood pale-faced beside the open door. The winter wind rushed into the house, carrying with it the scent of damp earth. "What has happened?" demanded Mr. Ashcombe. One of the footmen swallowed nervously. "It was Mrs. Palmer, sir." "The gardener's wife?" "Yes." "Where is she?" The man pointed toward the grounds. "Near the crypt." Without hesitation, Holmes strode outside. The remainder of us followed. The Ashcombe family crypt stood upon a low rise beyond an avenue of ancient yew trees. Constructed of grey stone generations earlier, it resembled a miniature chapel more than a tomb. Even from a distance I could see a cluster of frightened servants surrounding a woman wrapped in a shawl. Mrs. Palmer appeared badly shaken. Her face was colourless. Holmes knelt beside her. "Compose yourself, madam." She nodded weakly. "What did you see?" "The door," she whispered. "What about it?" "It was open." Mr. Ashcombe frowned. "Impossible." Mrs. Palmer pointed with a trembling hand. "It was standing wide open when I passed." Holmes turned toward the crypt. The iron door indeed stood ajar. A dark opening yawned beyond it. "Who closed it last?" Holmes asked. Mr. Ashcombe answered. "My father was buried there 5 years ago. And afterward, the door was locked." "By whom?" "The groundskeeper." Holmes nodded. "Then let us determine who opened it." Without waiting for agreement, he approached the entrance. I confess that I felt an involuntary chill as we followed him. The structure possessed that peculiar atmosphere common to places associated with death. The air seemed colder, the silence deeper. Inside, a narrow flight of stone steps descended into darkness. A lantern was produced. Holmes took it. Then we ventured below. The crypt contained a central chamber lined with burial alcoves. Several generations of Ashcombes rested there. Dust coated the floor. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling. At first glance, nothing appeared disturbed. Then Holmes crouched beside the entrance. "What is it?" I asked. He pointed. Fresh footprints. Several sets, clearly visible in the dust. Mr. Ashcombe stared. "Someone has been here. Recently." Holmes studied the impressions carefully. "At least twice." "Twice?" "One set entering, and the second, the same person leaving." I looked closer. The footprints were indeed remarkably distinct. "What can you tell?" Holmes measured one with his eye. "A man." "How do you know?" "Size." He followed the trail deeper into the crypt. The prints led toward the rear wall, then stopped, abruptly, as though the individual had vanished. "Extraordinary," murmured Holmes. I joined him. The wall appeared perfectly ordinary. Ancient stone blocks fitted together with admirable precision. No door, no opening, nothing. Yet the tracks ended there. Mr. Ashcombe shook his head. "There is nowhere to go." "Nevertheless," Holmes replied, "someone went somewhere." His fingers began exploring the stonework. I had seen him employ this technique before, patiently, methodically, searching not with his eyes but with his hands. Minutes passed. Then suddenly, a soft click echoed through the chamber. A section of wall shifted inward. The servants gasped. Even Mr. Ashcombe appeared astonished. A concealed passage revealed itself. Holmes smiled faintly. "I suspected as much." "You suspected a secret passage?" I exclaimed. "No." "Then what?" "I suspected architecture." The distinction was typical of him. Lantern raised high, he entered the newly revealed opening. The remainder of us followed. The passage extended perhaps 30 yards before terminating in a small chamber. Unlike the crypt, this room contained no coffins, only shelves. And upon those shelves stood dozens of wooden boxes. Dust lay thick upon everything. Yet one box had been disturbed recently. Holmes approached it. The lid stood slightly open. Inside rested a collection of documents, old letters, property deeds, financial records. Most appeared decades old. Holmes examined them quickly. Then his attention fixed upon a single envelope. The handwriting upon its front was unmistakably feminine. Eleanor Briggs. My pulse quickened. Holmes carefully opened it. Inside lay a folded letter. He unfolded the paper. Read the contents, then read them again. A remarkable transformation occurred. The expression vanished from his face entirely. For several seconds he stood absolutely still. "What is it?" I asked. No answer. "Holmes?" Slowly he handed me the document. The letter was dated 8 years earlier, addressed to no one, and signed by Eleanor Briggs. I read, "If these words are ever discovered, then events have taken a course I prayed would never occur. Jonathan must never be found where he now lies. Too many lives depend upon silence. God help me for what I have agreed to do." I stared at the page. A profound silence filled the chamber. At length Mr. Ashcombe spoke. "My brother is dead." No one answered. The implication was obvious. If Eleanor's words were genuine, Jonathan Ashcombe had not vanished. He had died, and someone had concealed the body. Holmes finally spoke. "Perhaps." I looked at him sharply. "Perhaps. Words are evidence, Watson." "Indeed." "They are not proof." Mr. Ashcombe appeared bewildered. "Surely this settles the matter." "On the contrary." Holmes folded the letter carefully. "It complicates it." "How?" "Because Eleanor Briggs was a highly intelligent woman." "What has that to do with anything?" "Everything." He held up the paper. "If she wished to reveal the truth, why conceal this letter?" The question silenced us. Holmes continued. "Why hide it inside a secret chamber?" "Fear?" I suggested. "Possibly. Or guilt." "Possibly." He slipped the letter into his pocket. "But neither explanation satisfies me." His gaze drifted around the room. Something else had captured his attention. On the floor near the shelves, a faint mark, barely visible. Holmes crouched, touched it lightly, then smiled. "What now?" I asked. "We are no longer alone in this investigation." Mr. Ashcombe frowned. "What do you mean?" Holmes pointed. "A footprint. Fresh. Much fresher than the others. Not 8 years old, not months old, perhaps only hours. Someone had entered this hidden chamber recently. Very recently. The realization struck all of us simultaneously. Someone besides Eleanor Briggs knew about the secret room. Someone had visited after her death. Someone who might already know Holmes had discovered it. The atmosphere changed immediately. What had seemed a historical mystery suddenly became something active and dangerous. Holmes rose. "Our unknown friend has become impatient." "You think they removed the trunk?" I asked. "Quite possibly." "And destroyed the photograph?" "Likely." Mr. Ashcombe's face darkened. "Then someone is attempting to conceal evidence." "Exactly." A servant suddenly appeared at the entrance to the passage, breathless. "Mr. Holmes?" "Yes." "A gentleman has arrived at the house." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "What gentleman?" "He says his name is Victor Hargreaves." The reaction from Mr. Ashcombe was immediate. "Hargreaves? You know him?" Holmes asked. "Very well. Who is he?" "My brother's closest friend." The room fell silent. Holmes's eyes sharpened. "And has this friend appeared during the last 8 years?" Mr. Ashcombe hesitated. "Rarely. Yet he chooses today to visit." "Apparently so." Holmes smiled slightly. The expression carried no warmth, only interest. "Excellent." I recognized that smile. Somewhere in the growing maze of clues, contradictions, hidden passages, vanished trunks, and cryptic confessions, a pattern was beginning to emerge. And Sherlock Holmes had just encountered another piece of it. Whether Victor Hargreaves had arrived as witness, suspect, or victim remained to be seen, but before the day was over, he would tell us a story so unexpected that it would cast doubt upon everything we believed about Jonathan Ashcombe's disappearance, including the possibility that the missing man had never vanished at all. Chapter 5. The Friend Who Knew Too Little. When we returned to Blackthorn Manor, we found the visitor waiting in the library. The room itself was a fitting setting for revelations. Tall shelves rose from floor to ceiling. Leather-bound volumes lined the walls. A coal fire burned steadily in the grate, casting a warm glow over dark oak furniture. Standing before the fireplace was a man of perhaps 45 years. Victor Hargreaves possessed the polished appearance of a successful gentleman. He was clean-shaven, well-dressed, and carried himself with quiet confidence. Yet, as Holmes entered, I noticed something curious. The confidence seemed forced. His eyes moved quickly around the room. His smile appeared carefully measured, and when he learned that Sherlock Holmes was present, his fingers tightened momentarily upon the brim of his hat. A small reaction, but not one that escaped Holmes. "Mr. Hargreaves," said Reginald Ashcombe, "this is Mr. Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson." The visitor bowed politely. "I have heard much about both gentlemen." Holmes nodded. "I trust your journey was pleasant." "Reasonably so." "Then perhaps you can explain why you chose this particular day to visit Blackthorn Manor." The question landed with surprising force. Mr. Hargreaves blinked. "Surely that is obvious." "Nothing is obvious." The man glanced toward Reginald. "I came because I heard of Eleanor Briggs's death." Holmes remained expressionless. "You were acquainted with her?" "Of course." "Closely?" "Not especially." "Yet you travelled here immediately." A brief hesitation followed. "Out of respect." Holmes smiled faintly. "I see." The conversation might have seemed ordinary to an outside observer. To me, however, it already resembled a duel. Each answer was being weighed, each word measured, each pause examined. Holmes seated himself. "You were Jonathan Ashcombe's closest friend?" "Yes." "For how many years?" "Nearly 15. "And during that time, did he ever speak of enemies?" "No." "Debts?" "No." "Secret affairs?" A flicker crossed the man's face. It vanished almost instantly. But Holmes saw it. "So did I." "Mr. Hargreaves?" The visitor cleared his throat. Jonathan was a private man. "Avoiding the question is not answering it." Another pause. "Very well. There may have been one lady." Reginald looked surprised. "My brother never mentioned anyone. He rarely discussed personal matters." Holmes leaned forward. "Who was she?" "I do not know." "You do not know? I never learned her name." Holmes tapped a finger against the arm of his chair. "Interesting. Why?" "Because most men remember the identities of mysterious women connected to their closest friends." The remark visibly unsettled him. Before he could respond, Holmes continued, "When did you last see Jonathan Ashcombe?" "The night he disappeared." The room grew quiet. "Tell us about it." Hargreaves nodded slowly. "I dined here at the manor." "With whom?" "Jonathan." "Reginald." Eleanor Briggs served the meal. Holmes's eyes sharpened. "And afterward?" Jonathan appeared distracted. "In what way?" "He kept checking the clock." "Did he explain why?" "No." "Was he expecting someone?" "I assumed so." "You assumed?" "Yes." Holmes remained silent. The pressure of that silence often proved more effective than direct questioning. Eventually, Hargreaves continued. "After dinner, he asked me to accompany him outside." "Where?" "The East Garden." That immediately captured Holmes's attention. "The East Garden?" "Yes." "Near the old wall?" The man's surprise was unmistakable. "How did you know?" Holmes ignored the question. "What happened there?" "Very little." "Mr. Hargreaves," the tone was mild, yet it carried unmistakable authority. "Very well," the visitor sighed. Jonathan was nervous. "About what?" "He wouldn't say." "Did he mention danger?" "No." "Fear?" Perhaps. Holmes nodded slowly. And then, he left, alone. Yes. At what hour? Approximately 10 o'clock. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. Eleanor Briggs had supposedly retired around that time, yet she had later been seen near the same location. The coincidence was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. What direction did Jonathan take? Holmes asked. Toward the lake. Did you follow him? No. Why not? Because he asked me not to. Again that tiny hesitation. Again that faint sense of calculation. Holmes noticed it. I knew he noticed it. And Hargreaves likely knew it as well. The atmosphere in the room tightened. Did you ever tell the police this? The question struck like a bullet. Hargreaves stared. No. Why not? I didn't think it important. Holmes's voice remained calm. You omitted the final conversation you ever had with your closest friend. A silence followed. Yes. And considered it unimportant. The visitor shifted uncomfortably. When you put it that way, I prefer facts exactly as they are. Reginald Ashcombe looked bewildered. Victor, why didn't you mention this before? I simply forgot. The answer sounded weak even to my ears. Holmes rose and crossed to the fireplace. His back remained turned toward us. A tactic I had seen before. People often revealed more when they believed they were not being directly observed. What was Jonathan carrying? Holmes asked casually. The effect was immediate. For a fraction of a second, Hargreaves froze. Then, nothing unusual, Holmes turned. That was not my question. The man's face tightened. He carried a satchel. Reginald frowned. A satchel? Yes. Why was that never mentioned? I didn't think it mattered. Holmes's eyes glittered. Everything mattered to Holmes, particularly details concealed for 8 years. What became of the satchel? He asked. I have no idea. Describe it. Brown leather. Large, medium, locked? I couldn't say. Holmes resumed his seat. For several moments no one spoke. Then he asked, Did Jonathan trust Eleanor Briggs? The question seemed to catch Hargreaves entirely off guard. Of course. Completely. Yes. More than anyone else. The man hesitated. Then nodded, probably. A strange expression crossed Holmes's face. Not satisfaction, not surprise, recognition. As though another piece of an invisible structure had slid into place. At that exact moment, the library door opened. Mrs. Wilcox entered. She looked pale, alarmed. Beg pardon, sir. What is it? Asked Reginald. The housekeeper swallowed. I thought you should know. Know what? A room has been searched. Everyone became still. What room? Holmes asked sharply. Eleanor Briggs's room. A chill swept through me. Holmes stood instantly. When? Sometime within the last hour. How do you know? Because everything has been disturbed. The significance was obvious. Someone had entered after our inspection. Someone desperately seeking something, or confirming whether we had already found it. Holmes moved toward the door. Show me. Moments later we hurried upstairs. The scene that greeted us was unmistakable. Drawers stood open. Books lay scattered. The mattress had been overturned. Even sections of the carpet had been lifted. Whoever had searched the room had done so thoroughly, and in great haste. Holmes examined the destruction silently. Then he noticed something near the fireplace. A folded scrap of paper. It had not been there before. Of that I was certain. Holmes picked it up, opened it, read it. His expression hardened. What is it? I asked. Without speaking, he handed it to me. The note contained only 6 words, written in a hurried hand. Leave the past buried, Mr. Holmes. A profound silence filled the room. Mr. Ashcombe looked horrified. Hargreaves appeared equally shocked. Perhaps genuinely, perhaps not. Holmes folded the note carefully. Then, to my astonishment, smiled. Not because the threat amused him, but because it confirmed something. What are you thinking? I asked. His eyes remained fixed upon the message. I am thinking, Watson, that our unknown adversary has made a mistake. What mistake? He has just informed us that the past is exactly where we should continue digging. And as Holmes slipped the note into his pocket, I saw that the investigation had entered a new and far more dangerous stage. For the first time, someone had openly acknowledged our presence, someone who feared discovery, someone willing to take risks, and somewhere within Blackthorn Manor, that person was watching us, even now. Chapter 6. Beneath the Third Stone. The threatening note transformed the atmosphere at Blackthorn Manor. Until that moment, we had been investigating the shadows of a long-forgotten mystery. Now the mystery had reached out and acknowledged us. Someone was afraid. And in Sherlock Holmes's experience, fear was often the most revealing evidence of all. That evening, a bitter wind swept across the estate. Rain rattled against the windows, and the ancient manor groaned softly beneath the assault of the weather. After dinner, Holmes retired with me to the study which Mr. Ashcombe had placed at our disposal. For nearly an hour he paced silently before the fire. I knew better than to interrupt him. At last he stopped. "Watson." "Yes? What is the most important clue in this case?" "The confession." "No." "The hidden chamber." "No." "The threatening note." Holmes shook his head. "All important, none fundamental." I considered. "The missing trunk." "Closer." He smiled faintly. "What have we neglected?" I reviewed every detail in my mind. The vanished brother, the photograph, the journal, the secret room, the footprints. Then suddenly, the third stone. Exactly. I sat upright. The confession. The truth lies beneath the third stone. Yes. Holmes pointed his pipe toward me. Yet nobody has determined which stone. The simplicity of the observation annoyed me. Of course, everyone had focused on what the phrase might mean. No one had identified its location. Holmes glanced at the clock. "Come." "Now?" "Immediately." "At this hour?" "Our adversary is already moving pieces across the board." "We shall do the same." A few minutes later we found ourselves outside beneath a cold drizzle. Mr. Ashcombe insisted upon accompanying us. Together we crossed the grounds carrying lanterns. "Where are we going?" he asked. "The East Garden." "The place where Jonathan was last seen?" "Precisely." The old garden occupied a neglected section of the estate. Once elegant, it had fallen into partial disrepair. Overgrown hedges bordered winding paths. Stone benches stood among tangled shrubs. A crumbling wall marked the far boundary. The atmosphere suited the mystery perfectly. Holmes moved slowly through the darkness, examining, observing, measuring. At length he stopped beside a stone pathway. "Interesting. What is?" I asked. He held up the lantern. The path consisted of large rectangular stones set into the earth. Several appeared slightly uneven. Mr. Ashcombe frowned. "There are dozens of stones." "Indeed." Holmes crouched. "Which raises a question." "What question?" "Why would Eleanor refer to the third stone unless both she and the intended reader knew precisely which stone?" I considered the matter. Perhaps it was a place known to her. "Exactly." His gaze shifted toward the garden wall, then toward a narrow iron gate, then back again. Slowly, a smile appeared. "I believe I see it." He walked to the gate, facing inward toward the garden, then counted aloud. 1. A lantern beam illuminated the first paving stone. 2. The second. 3. The third lay partially concealed beneath moss. Holmes knelt. His fingers brushed away years of growth. Then he examined the stone's edges. "What do you see?" I asked. "Disturbance. Recent?" "Not especially." He stood. "Help me." Together we applied pressure. The stone shifted. Mr. Ashcombe gasped. Beneath it lay a shallow cavity, empty. For a moment no one spoke. Then I felt profound disappointment. Nothing. Holmes was not disappointed. He appeared intensely interested. On the contrary, he pointed toward the cavity. "What do you observe?" I bent closer. The soil beneath was compacted, except in one area. A rectangular impression remained, as though something had rested there for many years and been removed recently, very recently. "The trunk," I whispered. "Possibly," Holmes nodded. "Or something contained within it." Mr. Ashcombe stared into the hole. "Then someone found this place before us." "Exactly." Holmes examined the surrounding earth, then suddenly froze. His lantern shifted, illuminating something half buried near the edge of the cavity. A small metallic object. He retrieved it carefully. The item proved to be a key. Old, brass, intricately made. Holmes cleaned away the mud. A single number had been engraved upon one side. "What lock does it fit?" I asked. Holmes slipped it into his pocket. "That is the correct question." As we continued examining the area, another discovery followed. Near the wall stood a weathered stone bench. Beneath it, Holmes found traces of candle wax. Fresh enough to have survived only a few weeks of weather, someone had visited the garden at night, repeatedly, and not long ago, the realization deepened the mystery considerably. Eleanor Briggs had apparently been returning to this location. For what purpose? To retrieve something? To hide something? Or to ensure that something remained hidden? We returned to the manor shortly before midnight. Most of the household had retired. Only Mrs. Wilcox remained awake. She greeted us in the entrance hall. "Mr. Holmes?" "Yes?" "There is a matter I forgot to mention." Holmes immediately focused upon her. "What matter?" The woman hesitated. "I did not think it important." Holmes sighed softly. "No one ever does." She flushed slightly. "It concerns Eleanor." "Go on." 3 weeks before her death, she received a visitor. The effect upon Holmes was immediate. "A visitor?" "Yes." "Who?" "I don't know." "Describe him." Mrs. Wilcox frowned in concentration. "He was elderly." "Continue." "Tall." "Anything distinctive?" "A limp." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. "Did they speak privately?" "Entirely." "How long did the visit last?" "Nearly an hour." "And afterward?" The woman lowered her voice. Eleanor seemed frightened. "Again frightened?" "Yes." "What happened then?" "She locked herself in her room." Holmes considered this. "Did anyone overhear the conversation?" "No." "Did the visitor leave a name?" Mrs. Wilcox shook her head. Then suddenly her expression changed. "Wait, what is it?" "There was one thing." Holmes stepped closer. "The man gave her an envelope." The room became silent. "And?" "When she thought no one was watching, Eleanor burned it." Immediately, within minutes, a strange look appeared in Holmes's eyes. Not confusion, certainty. The first genuine certainty I had seen since the case began. "What are you thinking?" I asked. He turned toward the staircase. "I am thinking that Eleanor Briggs was not protecting herself." "No, she was protecting someone else." Mr. Ashcombe frowned. "My brother?" "Perhaps." "And the visitor?" Holmes smiled faintly. "The visitor, Watson, is far more interesting." "Why?" "Because I strongly suspect he is already dead." The statement stunned us all. Before anyone could demand an explanation, a loud crash echoed from somewhere above. Glass shattered. A door slammed. Then came the unmistakable sound of running footsteps. Holmes sprang forward instantly. "Someone's in the house!" A servant cried out. Another voice shouted from the upper floor. The entire manor erupted into confusion. Holmes was already racing toward the staircase, and as I followed close behind, I could not escape the growing conviction that our unknown adversary had just made another desperate move. The question was whether we were about to catch them, or whether they intended to silence someone before the truth could finally emerge. Chapter 7. The Figure in the Corridor. The upper floors of Blackthorn Manor erupted into chaos. Servants emerged from their rooms, carrying candles and lanterns. Doors opened along the corridor. Confused voices echoed through the house as people demanded explanations from one another. Amid the confusion, Holmes moved with astonishing speed and purpose. He seemed less like a detective than a hunting hound who had suddenly caught a scent. "The sound came from the east wing," shouted a footman. Holmes was already running in that direction. I followed close behind. The corridor stretched before us in alternating bands of darkness and flickering light. Portraits of dead Ashcombs stared down from the walls. Ahead, a maid pointed with a trembling hand. "I saw someone." "Where?" Holmes demanded. "There." She indicated a distant intersection of corridors. "A man?" I think so." "Think?" It happened very quickly. Holmes reached the spot. Too late. The corridor beyond stood empty. Only silence remained. He immediately knelt beside a shattered window. Cold air rushed through the opening. The glass had been broken from the inside. Holmes examined the frame, then the floor, then the sill. At length he stood. "What do you make of it?" I asked. "A performance. A performance. The window was broken to suggest escape. You don't believe anyone left through it." He pointed downward. 3 floors below lay a stone terrace. No sane man would attempt the descent. Then why break it? To direct attention away from something else. His gaze swept the corridor, searching, calculating. Then suddenly he walked toward a nearby door. It stood slightly open. Inside was a storage room. Dusty. Unused. Apparently empty. Apparently. Holmes entered. His lantern illuminated shelves, crates, old furniture, and forgotten household items. Then he stopped. On the floor lay a muddy footprint. Fresh. Very fresh. The intruder had been here. And recently. Holmes followed the trail deeper into the room. The footprints ended beside an ancient wardrobe. Without hesitation he opened it. Nothing. Merely hanging cloth covers and old garments. Yet Holmes smiled. Excellent. I had long since learned that such remarks usually indicated something far from excellent for the criminal involved. "What have you found?" He pointed. The rear panel of the wardrobe had been scratched repeatedly. A concealed door. Within minutes we discovered the mechanism. The panel swung inward, revealing a narrow servant's passage. Mr. Ashcombe stared. "I had no idea this existed." "Many large houses possess such passages," Holmes replied. "This one has been used recently." We entered. The passage extended through the walls of the manor itself, a hidden network connecting various rooms. Dust covered most surfaces, yet a clear trail showed recent activity. Someone had been moving through these corridors for weeks, possibly months. The discovery transformed the investigation. Our unknown adversary possessed unrestricted access to the house. They could observe conversations, search rooms, move unseen, and perhaps much more. The passage eventually emerged behind a panel near the library. Holmes examined the route carefully. Then his expression became thoughtful. "Remarkable. What is?" "The destination." "Why?" He pointed. The concealed opening overlooked a particular section of the library, specifically, the desk used by Reginald Ashcombe, a place where letters and documents were frequently left. Someone had been spying, perhaps for years. The implication was deeply unsettling. As we returned to the main corridor, a voice called from below. "Mr. Holmes!" It was Mrs. Wilcox. Her face appeared pale with alarm. "What is it?" Holmes asked. "I think something has been stolen." The statement immediately captured his attention. "What? A box? What box?" "Eleanor's box." The housekeeper led us downstairs, into a small office near the servants' quarters. There stood an empty shelf. "Describe it." "A wooden box. Large." "No." She held her hands apart. "About this size. Contents? I don't know. Who owned it?" "Eleanor Briggs." "When did you last see it?" "Yesterday. And now it is gone." "Yes." Holmes studied the shelf, then examined the dust. At length he nodded. "The theft occurred tonight." "How can you tell?" "The dust pattern." Mrs. Wilcox looked astonished. Holmes continued. "Was the box locked?" "Always." "Did Eleanor ever allow anyone to open it?" "Never." This interested Holmes greatly. "What was inside?" "I honestly don't know." The woman hesitated. "Though I once heard something rattling. Metal, Perhaps. Holmes's eyes narrowed. The key we had found beneath the third stone immediately came to my mind. Clearly it had come to his as well. Did Eleanor possess the key? I assume so. Did you ever see it? No. Holmes remained silent for several moments. Then he asked, "Where is Victor Hargreaves?" Mrs. Wilcox blinked. "In his room, I believe." "Believe? I have not seen him recently." Holmes turned toward me. "Watson." "Yes? Let us verify that." A few minutes later we arrived outside the guest room occupied by Hargreaves. Holmes knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Silence. Mr. Ashcombe frowned. "Perhaps he is asleep." Holmes tested the handle. The door opened. The room was empty. The bed had not been used. The window stood slightly open, and upon the desk lay a single sheet of paper. Holmes picked it up, read it, then handed it to Reginald. The message was brief. "Forgive me. I should have spoken years ago." No signature was necessary. Mr. Ashcombe turned pale. "Victor." Holmes crossed to the window. Outside, darkness blanketed the grounds. "He has fled." "Why?" I asked. "Because he is frightened. Of being exposed." "Perhaps." The answer surprised me. "You still aren't certain?" "No. But surely this looks guilty." Holmes smiled faintly. "My dear Watson, appearances have looked guilty from the beginning." He turned back toward the room. His gaze settled upon a travelling case standing beside the bed. Unlike its owner, it had not departed. "Interesting. What is?" "He left in a hurry." Holmes opened the case. Inside lay clothing, personal items, books, ordinary possessions. Then he discovered a leather notebook hidden beneath the lining. His expression sharpened immediately. Without a word he opened it. The pages contained dates, names, meetings, observations, a personal journal, and near the centre of the book was an entry dated 8 years earlier. "The night Jonathan Ashcombe vanished." Holmes read it carefully, then read it again. For the first time in the entire case, genuine astonishment crossed his face. "What is it?" I demanded. Slowly he handed me the notebook. My eyes found the relevant passage. The words were written hurriedly, as though composed by a deeply troubled man. "Jonathan insists that Eleanor must never learn the truth. He fears her reaction more than anyone else's. I pray he is wrong." I looked up. "Good heavens," Holmes nodded. Everything we had assumed was suddenly inverted. Until now, we had believed Eleanor Briggs knew some secret about Jonathan Ashcombe. The journal suggested precisely the opposite. Jonathan had been hiding something from Eleanor, something he feared she might discover. Something important enough to mention on the very night he disappeared. The implications were staggering. Holmes closed the notebook. "The board has shifted." "What do you mean?" "It means, Watson, that we have been asking the wrong question." I stared. "What question should we be asking?" He moved toward the door. His eyes reflected a level of excitement I had rarely witnessed. "We have spent days asking what happened to Jonathan Ashcombe." "Yes." "And now?" Holmes paused. A slow smile appeared. "Now I wish to know why Jonathan Ashcombe was so desperately afraid of his own housekeeper." At that very moment, somewhere beyond the walls of the manor, a church bell struck midnight. And though I did not realize it then, that question would lead us toward the most shocking revelation of the entire mystery. Chapter 8. The Woman in the Photograph. The disappearance of Victor Hargreaves cast a long shadow over Blackthorn Manor. By morning, every servant on the estate had heard of it. Rumours spread rapidly. Some claimed he had fled from guilt. Others insisted he had been threatened. A few whispered that Jonathan Ashcombe himself had somehow returned. Holmes encouraged none of the speculation, nor did he discourage it. As he once remarked, rumours were often more revealing than facts, because they exposed what people secretly feared. The following morning found us assembled in the breakfast room. Reginald Ashcombe appeared exhausted. Mrs. Wilcox was pale with anxiety. Even the servants moved with unusual caution. Only Holmes seemed invigorated. He had spent several hours examining Victor Hargreaves's notebook before retiring shortly before dawn. Now he sat calmly stirring his coffee. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked. "Approximately 42 minutes. You appear remarkably cheerful for a man who has scarcely rested." "Because the case has finally become interesting." Mr. Ashcombe looked up. "Interesting? Until yesterday we possessed clues, and now we possess contradictions." I knew from experience that Holmes regarded contradictions as treasures. Facts could mislead. Contradictions almost never did. A footman entered, carrying the Morning Post. Several letters were distributed around the table. One was addressed to Holmes. That alone was unusual. More unusual still was the fact that no stamp appeared upon the envelope. Someone had delivered it by hand. Holmes examined it carefully before opening it. Inside was a single photograph. Nothing more, no note, no explanation, only a photograph. The image immediately captured my attention. It depicted a young woman standing beside a garden wall, beautiful, dark-haired, elegantly dressed. The photograph appeared old, at least 10 years old, perhaps more. Across one corner ran a faint crease, as though the image had once been folded repeatedly. "Do you recognize her?" Holmes asked. Mr. Ashcombe studied it. "No." Mrs. Wilcox shook her head. "I have never seen her." Holmes handed the photograph to me. Something about it felt strangely familiar. Then I realized why. The background, the wall behind the woman, the east garden. Holmes nodded. The very same. The realization silenced everyone. Whoever had delivered the photograph wanted us to notice it. The question was why. Holmes turned the image over. Written upon the reverse side were 3 words. "She knew first." No signature, no further explanation, merely those words. She knew first. Holmes slipped the photograph into his pocket, then rose abruptly. "Mr. Ashcombe." "Yes?" "Have portraits and family records been preserved?" "Of course." "Excellent." Within minutes, we found ourselves in a long room adjacent to the library. The Ashcombe family archives occupied shelves from floor to ceiling. Records dating back generations filled cabinets and drawers. Holmes immediately began searching. For nearly an hour he worked in silence. Then suddenly he stopped. "Watson." I joined him. He held an old photograph album. Inside were dozens of images, family gatherings, estate functions, hunting parties, formal portraits. Then I saw her, the same woman, several years younger, standing beside Jonathan Ashcombe. My pulse quickened. "Who is she?" Mr. Ashcombe peered over my shoulder. His expression changed instantly. "Good Lord, you know her." "Of course. Who is she?" He hesitated, then answered quietly, "Clara Whitmore." The name meant nothing to me, but not to Holmes. I saw immediate interest flash across his face. "Tell us about Miss Whitmore." Mr. Ashcombe lowered himself into a chair. "She lived nearby. And Jonathan was fond of her. Fond. He intended to marry her." This revelation stunned me. Neither Hargreaves nor any other witness had mentioned an engagement. "What happened?" Holmes asked. Mr. Ashcombe's expression darkened. "She vanished." The room became silent. "Vanished?" I repeated. 10 years ago, before Jonathan disappeared. 2 years before. Holmes's attention sharpened visibly. "Explain." Mr. Ashcombe nodded slowly. "Clara Whitmore lived with her father." "Go on." "One day she simply left." "No explanation?" "None." "Police investigation." "Brief." "And the result?" "Nothing." Holmes folded his arms. "A second disappearance." "Yes." The significance was impossible to ignore. 2 people connected to Blackthorn Manor had vanished within a period of 2 years. 1 could be coincidence, 2 rarely were. "How did Jonathan react?" Holmes asked. "Badly." "Meaning?" "He was devastated." Mr. Ashcombe looked toward the window. I had never seen him so affected. "Did he continue searching for her?" "For months." Did he ever find her? No. Holmes remained thoughtful. Then he produced the photograph. Are you certain this is Clara Whitmore? Absolutely. The certainty in his voice left no room for doubt. Holmes studied the image again. Then his gaze drifted toward the inscription. She knew first. What did she know? I asked. Holmes did not answer, because he had already noticed something else, a detail none of us had seen. He handed me the photograph. Examine the wall. I looked carefully. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then there are markings, tiny scratches, almost invisible, cut into the stone. Not random scratches, letters, initials, C.W., and beside them, J.A. Jonathan Ashcombe, Clara Whitmore. The discovery deepened the mystery further. Clearly the location held significance. Yet why send the photograph now? And who had written the message? Before we could pursue the matter further, Mrs. Wilcox entered hurriedly. Mr. Holmes. Yes? I found something. Her voice trembled. What sort of thing? A letter. Holmes turned immediately. Where? In Eleanor's Bible. The room fell silent. Mrs. Wilcox handed over a folded sheet. The paper appeared old, very old. The handwriting was unmistakably Eleanor Briggs's. Holmes unfolded it carefully. As he read, his expression grew increasingly grave. What is it? I asked. He handed me the document. The letter was unfinished. Several lines had been crossed out. Others appeared hurried, yet the meaning remained unmistakable. If Clara had spoken sooner, none of this would have happened. Jonathan believed he was protecting her. He never understood that she was protecting him. When the truth emerged, it was already too late. I stared at the page. A profound silence followed. The implications were enormous. Jonathan, Clara, a hidden truth, mutual protection, and catastrophe. Yet still no explanation, only more questions. Holmes folded the letter, then moved slowly toward the fireplace. For several moments he stood staring into the flames. I recognized the posture. His mind was working furiously. At last he spoke. Watson. Yes? What is the one thing missing from every version of this story? I considered. Evidence? No. Certainty? No. I shook my head. Then what? Holmes turned. The victim. The answer stunned me. Jonathan Ashcombe. Perhaps. You think he may not be dead? At this point, I think nothing. His eyes narrowed. But I observe. What do you observe? That we possess confessions without crimes. He began counting upon his fingers. A missing woman. Yes. A missing man. Yes. A frightened housekeeper. Yes. A fleeing friend. Yes. And yet not a single confirmed death. The realization struck me like a blow. For days we had spoken as though murder were established fact. It was not remotely. Everything rested upon assumptions. Holmes smiled faintly. A dangerous habit, assumptions. Before I could reply, hurried footsteps sounded in the corridor. A servant burst into the room, breathless, alarmed. Mr. Holmes! What is it? The lake. What about it? The servant swallowed. Something has been found. The room became instantly silent. What exactly? Holmes asked. The man looked pale. A skeleton. For the first time in the entire investigation, even Sherlock Holmes appeared genuinely surprised, and within moments we were racing toward the lake, unaware that the discovery waiting there would shatter nearly every theory we had formed thus far. Chapter 9. The Skeleton at the Lake. The news spread through Blackthorn Manor with astonishing speed. By the time Holmes, Mr. Ashcombe and I reached the eastern lake, a considerable crowd had already gathered along the shoreline. Servants, gardeners and labourers stood whispering among themselves, while a pair of constables attempted to maintain order. The lake itself stretched dark and motionless beneath the grey winter sky. Recent storms had lowered the water level considerably. Near the reeds at the northern edge stood the source of the excitement, a partially exposed skeleton. Holmes pushed through the crowd. "Stand back, please." The constables recognized him immediately and complied without objection. I followed closely. As a medical man, I had unfortunately encountered human remains on numerous occasions. Even so, the sight before us was unsettling. The skeleton lay tangled among roots and reeds. Several bones remained partially embedded in mud. Fragments of decayed clothing clung to portions of the frame. Clearly, the remains had rested there for many years. Mr. Ashcombe's face had gone completely pale. My God! No one needed to ask what he was thinking. The same thought had occurred to everyone present. Jonathan Ashcombe, the vanished brother. The missing man, at last discovered. Holmes, however, showed no sign of reaching such a conclusion. He knelt beside the remains and began his examination. After several moments he spoke. Interesting. I almost laughed. In Holmes's vocabulary, the discovery of a skeleton was apparently merely interesting. "What do you observe?" I asked. He pointed toward the skull. "The teeth." I leaned closer. Several teeth remained remarkably intact. Then I noticed something peculiar. Gold. A visible dental repair. Holmes nodded. "You see it?" "Yes." "What of it?" He rose. "Mr. Ashcombe, did your brother possess gold dental work?" The question caught the man off guard. "I honestly don't know. Think carefully." After a moment he shook his head. "I never noticed." Holmes turned to me. "Watson?" I crouched beside the remains. The workmanship appeared distinctive and expensive, uncommon for the period. "Precisely." Holmes folded his arms. "Jonathan Ashcombe may have possessed such work." "May have. Yet we must not assume." Mr. Ashcombe looked bewildered. "A body is found beside the very lake where my brother was last seen." "Indeed. And you still doubt?" Holmes smiled faintly. "My dear sir, I doubt most things." Before further discussion could occur, another voice interrupted. "Excuse me." We turned. A middle-aged groundskeeper stood nearby. He appeared deeply uncomfortable. "You found the remains?" Holmes asked. "Yes, sir." "What exactly happened?" The man shifted his weight nervously. "The storm washed away part of the bank. And then I noticed bones." Holmes nodded. "Had you searched this area before?" "Many times." "During the original investigation?" "Yes." "Was anything discovered then?" "No." Holmes looked thoughtful. "Curious. Very curious indeed. If the lake had been searched thoroughly 8 years earlier, why had the remains escaped detection?" The question clearly troubled him. The arrival of the local physician interrupted our thoughts. Together he and I conducted a more detailed examination. Nearly half an hour passed. When we finally rose, Holmes approached immediately. "Well?" I hesitated. "Certain conclusions are possible." "Such as?" "The remains are old." "How old?" "Approximately 8 to 12 years." Mr. Ashcombe visibly stiffened. The estimate aligned perfectly with Jonathan's disappearance. "And the sex?" Holmes asked. "Male." Again the implications were obvious. The physician nodded in agreement. "Beyond that, certainty becomes difficult." Holmes crouched once more beside the skeleton. His attention focused upon something near the rib cage, a small, metallic object, carefully extracted, cleaned. Examined, a pocket watch. Though heavily corroded, portions remained intact. Most importantly, the back bore an engraved inscription. Mr. Ashcombe gasped when he saw it. That belonged to Jonathan. For the first time, Holmes appeared genuinely thoughtful. The evidence had become considerably stronger. The watch undoubtedly belonged to the missing man. Yet something still troubled him. I could see it. He turned the watch over repeatedly, studying every surface, every scratch, every imperfection. Then his eyes narrowed. "Remarkable. What now?" I asked. He handed me the watch. The chain. I examined it. Nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed. The chain had broken. Not through age, not through corrosion. It had been cut, cleanly, deliberately, with a sharp instrument. I looked up. Holmes nodded. Exactly. Someone cut it, yes, and removed the watch. Perhaps. Then how did it return to the body? Holmes smiled. An excellent question. The significance struck me immediately. If the watch had been removed, it must also have been replaced, meaning someone had interacted with the remains after death, long after death. The mystery deepened once more. As the remains were prepared for transport, Holmes wandered along the shoreline. His attention seemed fixed upon the surrounding terrain rather than the skeleton itself. Eventually, he stopped near a cluster of reeds. "What have you found?" I called. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he bent and retrieved something from the mud. When he returned, he held a small brass object. I recognized it instantly. The number engraved upon it matched perfectly. Another key, identical to the one discovered beneath the third stone. The discovery stunned us all. "2 keys," I said. "Exactly." Holmes turned them over in his palm. "Part of a set. What do they open?" "We shall discover." His expression suggested he already possessed suspicions. Before we could discuss the matter further, a carriage approached at considerable speed. A uniformed constable stepped out. He appeared anxious. "Mr. Holmes?" "Yes?" "A message from Hartford." Holmes accepted the folded paper. "Read it." Then became very still. I recognized the reaction immediately. Something important, very important. "What is it?" I asked. Holmes handed me the telegram. The message contained only a single sentence. "Victor Hargreaves has been found." I looked up. Alive. Holmes's expression remained unreadable. "Unfortunately not." A cold silence followed. "Dead?" "Yes." "How?" He took back the telegram. "The details are sparse." "Where was he found?" "In an abandoned coach house approximately 5 miles from here." Mr. Ashcombe sank heavily onto a nearby bench. The news struck him visibly. Only yesterday Hargreaves had spoken with us. Now he was dead. The case had claimed its first confirmed victim, and the timing was impossible to ignore. Victor fled. Victor possessed information. Victor dies. The sequence seemed almost too perfect. Holmes folded the telegram carefully, then gazed across the lake. For several moments no one spoke. Finally, I asked the question on everyone's mind. "Do you think he was murdered?" Holmes's answer came immediately. "I think someone wishes us to believe he was." The distinction was characteristic and deeply unsettling, because if Victor Hargreaves's death was not what it appeared to be, then another layer of deception had just been added to an already bewildering mystery. As we returned toward the manor beneath the darkening afternoon sky, I could not shake the feeling that the investigation was approaching a critical point. Pieces that had long remained scattered were beginning to move toward one another, and somewhere behind the confusion, Sherlock Holmes was finally beginning to see the outline of the truth. The question was whether the truth would reveal itself before another life was lost. Chapter 10. The Dead Man Who Wasn't. The telegram concerning Victor Hargreaves dominated the remainder of the afternoon. By evening, Holmes and I were travelling by carriage toward the abandoned coach house where the body had reportedly been discovered. The structure stood several miles from Blackthorn Manor, on a neglected stretch of road seldom used except by local farmers. Twilight had already fallen when we arrived. A constable awaited us outside. His expression suggested considerable confusion. "Mr. Holmes, you sent the telegram." "Yes, sir." "And the body remains inside?" The constable hesitated. "Well, sir, that's the peculiar part." Holmes immediately became attentive. "Peculiar in what way?" The man cleared his throat. "The body has disappeared." I confess that even I stared in astonishment. "Disappeared?" "Yes, doctor." Holmes smiled. A very slight smile, the sort that appeared whenever the universe behaved exactly as he expected. "Excellent." The constable looked baffled. "Excellent, sir." "Most excellent." He gestured toward the building. "Tell us everything." Inside, the coach house consisted of a single large chamber. Dust covered most surfaces. Broken farming equipment occupied one corner. The constable pointed toward a section of floor. The body was there. Who discovered it? A shepherd. Was the deceased identified? No. Holmes raised an eyebrow. No identification? Only a resemblance. A resemblance to whom? Victor Hargreaves. The detective nodded slowly. And who made that determination? The shepherd. I saw Holmes's eyes brighten. A mistaken identification. Already the situation looked considerably different. What condition was the body in? Holmes asked. Poor. Meaning, the face was difficult to recognize. Indeed. The constable appeared increasingly uncomfortable. We intended a formal examination this morning, but the body vanished first. Yes. Holmes crouched, examining the floor, the surrounding dust, the doorway. Several minutes passed. Then he rose. Our dead man walked away. The constable blinked. Pardon? The simplest explanation. You believe he was alive? Beyond reasonable doubt. The man stared. Holmes continued. No blood, no signs of struggle, no evidence of transport. He pointed toward faint marks in the dust. One individual entered. Yes, the same individual departed. The constable looked thoroughly bewildered. Then the shepherd made a mistake. Almost certainly. The revelation transformed the matter completely. Victor Hargreaves was no longer confirmed dead. Instead, he had vanished for a second time, which, in Holmes's view, made him considerably more interesting. As we returned to Blackthorn Manor later that evening, I voiced the question occupying my thoughts. Why fake his death? Holmes gazed through the carriage window. Perhaps he feared someone, or perhaps he is guilty. Perhaps. You still refuse to commit yourself, because facts remain incomplete. I sighed. One day, Holmes, you will drive me mad. My dear Watson, if I explained everything immediately, you would lose half the entertainment. The manor was quiet upon our return. Most of the household had retired. Only Reginald Ashcombe awaited us in the library. His expression suggested he had spent the evening wrestling with unpleasant thoughts. Any news? Holmes removed his coat. Mr. Hargreaves is alive. The reaction was immediate. What? Almost certainly. Reginald stared. But the telegram? Incorrect. For the first time in days, genuine relief crossed the man's face. Yet Holmes was not finished. However, the relief vanished. There is more. Of course there is. Holmes smiled faintly. Always. He removed Victor's notebook from his pocket, then opened it upon the desk. I spent part of last night studying this journal, and I discovered something overlooked previously. Reginald leaned forward. What? A date. The notebook was turned toward him. One page contained a brief entry written 6 months before Jonathan's disappearance. The words were simple, yet astonishing. Jay insists the key must remain hidden until Clara returns. Silence filled the room. I read the line twice, then a third time. The implications struck me gradually. Clara returns. Exactly, said Holmes. Jonathan expected her return. Apparently, but she had vanished. Holmes nodded, which suggests one of two possibilities. What? Either Jonathan knew where she was, or he believed she was still alive. The room became very still. For the first time, Clara Whitmore's disappearance appeared directly connected to the larger mystery. Not merely connected, central. Holmes closed the notebook. Watson, how many keys have we recovered? 2, and both bear the number 17. Yes, good. He rose abruptly. Because I believe I finally know what they open. Reginald stood. You do? I have a strong suspicion. Where? Holmes walked toward the door. The family archives. 20 minutes later, we stood once more among the shelves and cabinets of the archive room. Holmes moved directly toward a wall containing dozens of small locked compartments. Each bore a brass number. Many had not been opened in years. He examined them quickly, then stopped. Compartment 17. The lock matched the key perfectly. A pulse of excitement shot through me. Holmes inserted the key, turned it. The lock clicked. Slowly, the compartment opened. Inside lay a bundle of papers. Nothing more. No jewels, no valuables, only documents. Yet Holmes's expression told me they were precisely what he hoped to find. He removed the bundle carefully. The papers appeared older than anything we had yet discovered. Several letters, legal documents, and one sealed envelope. Across its front, in faded ink, appeared a single name, Clara Whitmore. No one spoke. The silence felt almost sacred. After all the disappearances, confessions, hidden chambers, and threats, we finally possessed something unquestionably connected to Clara herself. Holmes broke the seal, unfolded the contents, and began to read. As his eyes moved across the page, I observed something extraordinary. For the first time in the entire investigation, Sherlock Holmes looked genuinely shocked. Not intrigued, not interested, shocked. "What is it?" I demanded. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he handed me the letter. My eyes fell upon the opening lines, and suddenly I understood. Because the document was not written by Clara Whitmore, nor by Jonathan Ashcombe, nor by Eleanor Briggs, it was a birth record, and written across the margin, in Eleanor Briggs's unmistakable hand, were 6 words that threatened to overturn the entire case. Jonathan must never learn the truth. The room seemed to spin. I looked again, then again, and as the terrible possibility behind those words began to take shape, I realized that every mystery we had investigated so far might stem from a secret far older than Jonathan's disappearance. A secret someone had spent years trying to protect, and perhaps years killing to conceal. Chapter 11. The Secret in the Birth Record. For several moments after discovering the document, no one spoke. The only sound in the archive room was the faint ticking of a distant clock. Holmes stood motionless beside the open compartment. I remained bent over the letter. Reginald Ashcombe stared from one of us to the other. Finally, he broke the silence. "Will someone kindly explain what is happening?" Holmes took the document from my hands. "I shall explain what we know." "And what is that?" "Very little." Reginald groaned softly. "Of course." Holmes ignored the remark. The birth record lay open beneath the lamp. The details themselves appeared unremarkable at first glance. A child had been born nearly 30 years earlier. The location was London. The mother's name was recorded. The father's name was absent. Nothing unusual. Except for Eleanor Briggs's handwritten note, "Jonathan must never learn the truth." That sentence transformed everything. Why would Eleanor write such a thing? I asked. Because she possessed information Jonathan did not. Obviously. Which means she was guarding a secret. Reginald frowned. But what secret? Holmes tapped the document thoughtfully. The answer lies elsewhere. Where? In the remaining papers. We spent the next hour examining every item contained within compartment 17. Most appeared ordinary. Old correspondence, estate records, receipts. Yet Holmes insisted upon reading each page. His patience was eventually rewarded. Near the bottom of the bundle lay a letter written by Clara Whitmore, dated 11 years earlier, 1 year before her disappearance. The letter was addressed to Jonathan Ashcombe. Its contents proved illuminating. "Jonathan, I cannot continue pretending nothing is wrong. The answers exist whether we seek them or not. You deserve the truth, though I fear what it may do. Please trust me when I say that silence is becoming impossible." Clara Holmes read the letter twice, then carefully folded it. Remarkable. "What does it mean?" asked Reginald. "It means Clara discovered something. Something connected to the birth record." "Almost certainly." I considered the matter. If Clara learned the secret and then vanished, and Jonathan disappeared 2 years later, Holmes finished. The implication hung heavily in the air. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. One person uncovers a truth, which then vanishes. A second person pursues that truth, then vanishes as well. And a housekeeper spends years protecting whatever remained hidden. Holmes resumed examining the papers. Suddenly he stopped. His eyes narrowed. "Ah, what now?" I asked. He extracted a small folded note tucked between two documents. The paper had yellowed considerably with age. Its handwriting was unfamiliar, yet the message was unmistakably urgent. If Eleanor discovers the connection, everything will collapse. Holmes became very still. The note continued. Jonathan suspects nothing. That must not change. No signature appeared. No date. No indication of authorship. Yet its significance was enormous. For the first time, we possessed evidence that someone feared Eleanor Briggs herself. A striking reversal. Until now, we had assumed Eleanor was protecting secrets. Now it appeared she might once have been searching for them. Reginald sank heavily into a chair. "I no longer understand any of this." "That is perfectly natural," Holmes replied. "Do you understand it?" A faint smile crossed his face. "Enough." I immediately recognized the answer. Holmes had finally assembled the framework of the mystery. Perhaps not every detail, but enough. The signs were unmistakable. His questions had changed. His uncertainty had diminished. His confidence had returned. When Sherlock Holmes began answering questions with a single word, the solution was usually close, very close. At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. A servant entered. "Mr. Holmes." "Yes?" "A gentleman wishes to see you." Reginald frowned. "At this hour?" The servant nodded. "He insists it is urgent." Holmes glanced at the clock. Nearly 11. "His name?" The servant hesitated. "He refuses to give one." A curious expression appeared upon Holmes's face. "Where is he?" "In the entrance hall." "Show him in." Moments later, the stranger entered the archive room. I immediately understood the servant's hesitation. The visitor wore a heavy coat and broad hat. His collar concealed much of his face. Rainwater dripped from his clothing. Yet despite these precautions, something about him felt strangely familiar. Holmes recognized it instantly. I saw it in his eyes. The visitor removed his hat slowly. Reginald Ashcombe rose in shock. "Victor!" Indeed, it was Victor Hargreaves, alive, exhausted, and visibly terrified. The man looked as though he had not slept in days. His face appeared pale and drawn. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes. For several moments no one spoke. Then Holmes said quietly, "You finally decided to tell the truth." Victor's shoulders slumped. "Yes." "Why now?" The man laughed bitterly. "Because people are dying." The room became silent. Holmes pointed toward a chair. "Sit down." Victor obeyed immediately. He seemed relieved simply to stop standing. Holmes remained opposite him. "What frightened you into running?" Victor rubbed his face. "The same thing that frightened Eleanor." "Which was?" For several seconds he said nothing. Then, "The past." Holmes nodded. "As I suspected." Reginald stared. "Victor, what are you talking about?" The man looked toward him, and for the first time since entering the room, genuine sorrow appeared upon his face. Jonathan never disappeared by accident. No one moved. He discovered something. Holmes remained perfectly calm. "What did he discover?" Victor swallowed. "The truth about Clara." The room grew utterly silent. Outside, rain beat steadily against the windows. Inside, every eye remained fixed upon the trembling man. Reginald's voice emerged as little more than a whisper. "What truth?" Victor closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, resignation had replaced fear. He looked toward Holmes. "You already know part of it." "Perhaps." "Then you know Clara Whitmore wasn't who she claimed to be." The words struck the room like a thunderclap. Holmes did not react, which told me he had indeed suspected something similar. Victor continued. "Jonathan learned the truth shortly before she vanished." "And?" Holmes asked. The man drew a long breath, then spoke the sentence that changed the entire investigation. Clara Whitmore was not merely connected to the Ashcombe family. He looked directly at Reginald. She was part of it. Silence followed, profound, absolute. And as the full meaning of those words began to dawn upon us, I realized we had finally reached the hidden heart of the mystery. The secret Eleanor Briggs had carried for years. The secret Clara had uncovered. The secret Jonathan had pursued. And the secret someone had desperately tried to bury beneath decades of deception. Yet even then, none of us were prepared for the full truth that Holmes would soon reveal. Chapter 12. Holmes explains the impossible. No one spoke for several seconds after Victor Hargreaves's astonishing declaration. The rain lashed against the windows, the lamps flickered softly, and within the archive room, years of hidden history seemed to press in upon us from every side. Reginald Ashcombe was the first to recover. "What do you mean Clara was part of the family?" Victor lowered his gaze. "I mean exactly what I said." "Explain." The man looked toward Holmes. "You already know, don't you?" Holmes folded his hands. "I know enough. Then perhaps you should tell them." It was a remarkable moment. For the first time since our arrival at Blackthorn Manor, Victor Hargreaves appeared willing to surrender the burden he had carried for years. Holmes remained silent for several moments. Then he rose. Whenever my friend did so under such circumstances, I knew a formal explanation was about to follow. His eyes moved from one face to another. Reginald Ashcombe, Victor Hargreaves, Mrs. Wilcox, myself. At last, he began. The solution to this mystery became visible the moment we stopped treating it as a murder case. No one interrupted. Holmes continued. "We assumed Jonathan Ashcombe disappeared because of a crime." "Didn't he?" asked Reginald. "No." The answer stunned everyone. "Then what happened?" Holmes moved slowly around the room. "Let us begin with Clara Whitmore." He held up the birth record. "This document records the birth of a child." "Yes, a child whose existence was deliberately concealed." Victor nodded grimly. "Go on." Holmes pointed toward Eleanor's handwritten note. "Jonathan must never learn the truth." He looked toward Reginald. "Why would Eleanor write that?" "I don't know." "Because the truth would destroy Jonathan." Silence followed. Holmes continued. "Many years ago, a member of the Ashcombe family conducted a secret relationship." Reginald stared. "My father? Not your father? Then who?" "Your grandfather." The revelation struck him visibly. Holmes went on. "The relationship produced a child. The child in the record." "Exactly. And Clara." Holmes nodded. "That child eventually became Clara Whitmore." The room fell completely silent. I felt a chill run through me. Suddenly everything aligned. The secrecy, the fear, the hidden records, the desperate efforts to conceal the truth. Clara Whitmore had unknowingly grown up outside the family, yet by blood she belonged to it. Reginald sank slowly into a chair. "Good God." Holmes's voice remained calm. Years later, Jonathan Ashcombe met Clara. No one needed the rest explained. The horror became obvious. Jonathan fell in love with her, without knowing they were related, without suspecting the truth, without realizing the danger. Holmes continued. They planned marriage. Victor nodded miserably. "Yes." And then Clara discovered the birth record. The room remained utterly silent. "How?" I asked. Holmes smiled faintly, a question I spent considerable time answering. He held up one of the archive documents. Clara's father died. "Yes?" His effects included several old letters. Victor nodded again. "That's correct." Among those letters was evidence regarding her true parentage. Reginald covered his face with one hand. The tragedy of the situation had become painfully clear. Holmes continued. "Clara learned she was related to Jonathan." "And vanished," I said quietly. "Precisely. To protect him." "Exactly." The pieces finally locked together. Clara disappeared not because she feared Jonathan, but because she loved him. She could not reveal the truth without destroying him, nor could she proceed with the marriage. So she vanished. A terrible sacrifice. Yet not the end of the story, because Jonathan remained, and Jonathan wanted answers. Holmes resumed pacing. For 2 years Jonathan searched. "Yes," whispered Victor. "He never stopped. And eventually, he found evidence." Victor nodded slowly. "He found Eleanor." That surprised me. Eleanor knew? Not initially, Holmes replied, but she eventually discovered the truth as well. Mrs. Wilcox gasped softly. Then Eleanor was protecting Jonathan, among others. Holmes turned toward Victor. And now we arrive at the critical night. The room became still, the night Jonathan Ashcombe vanished. The center of the entire mystery. What happened? Reginald whispered. Victor looked exhausted. As Holmes has probably deduced, he swallowed. Jonathan found Clara. The words stunned us. What? I exclaimed. Victor nodded. He found her. Alive? Yes. The revelation felt almost unreal. After 8 years, after countless assumptions, after every theory of murder and concealment, Clara had been alive. Holmes showed no surprise, only confirmation. I suspected as much. Reginald stared. My brother found her? Yes. And then? Victor looked toward the floor. Then Jonathan learned everything. The hidden ancestry, the relationship, the years of deception, all at once, a crushing revelation. He couldn't bear it, Victor said quietly. The room fell silent. Holmes spoke softly. He left. Victor nodded. That night, voluntarily. Yes. With Clara. Yes. No murder, no body, no conspiracy. Jonathan Ashcombe had vanished by choice. The mystery's central assumption collapsed instantly. I looked toward Holmes. You knew. Not entirely, but you suspected. He nodded. Too many clues pointed away from homicide. The confession, the hidden records, the missing trunk, the secret meetings. Everything fit far better as concealment than murder. Yet one question remained. The most important question of all. If Jonathan left willingly, I said, why the confession? Holmes's expression changed. For the first time, genuine sadness entered his eyes, because Eleanor Briggs made a terrible mistake. The room became silent once more. What mistake? Asked Reginald. Holmes looked toward the fire, then answered quietly. The skeleton. No one moved. The skeleton found at the lake. A chill ran through me. That wasn't Jonathan. No. Then whose was it? Holmes took a slow breath. The answer to that question, Watson, explains everything. And as he spoke those words, I realized we had reached the final barrier separating us from the complete truth. The confession, the skeleton, the threats, the false trails, the hidden chamber, all of it would soon be explained. Yet even after all we had learned, the final revelation remained more astonishing than any of us imagined. Chapter 13. The Housekeeper's Final Confession. A profound silence settled over the archive room. At long last, we stood upon the threshold of the truth. Every clue, every contradiction, every disappearance, every fearful whisper, all of it now pointed toward a single unanswered question. Whose skeleton lay at the lake? Holmes stood before the fire, his tall figure outlined against the dancing glow. The discovery of the remains appeared to solve the mystery, he began. Indeed it did, I said, which immediately made me suspicious. A faint smile touched his lips. The skeleton was too convenient. Victor Hargreaves nodded slowly. Exactly, Holmes continued. The watch identified the remains as Jonathan Ashcombe. But incorrectly, said Reginald. Quite incorrectly. Holmes withdrew the corroded watch from his pocket. I examined this object repeatedly. He held it up, and eventually noticed something peculiar. The chain, I said. Yes, the cut chain. The detail that had troubled him from the beginning. Holmes nodded. Someone removed the watch, and later returned it. Exactly. He looked around the room. Why would anyone do such a thing? No one answered. Because the body originally possessed no means of identification. The implication struck me immediately. The watch had been planted, deliberately. Someone wanted the skeleton mistaken for Jonathan, Holmes continued. The remains belonged to another man entirely. Reginald stared. Who? Holmes looked toward Victor. The latter lowered his eyes. After a long pause, he answered, A drifter. The room became silent. A drifter, I repeated. Victor nodded. He died near the estate during a severe winter. Naturally, Holmes continued, his death presented a problem. A problem? For Eleanor Briggs. Everyone turned toward him. The detective's voice remained calm, because Jonathan and Clara had already disappeared. The pieces began falling into place, slowly, terribly. Eleanor knew they had left together, I said. Precisely. She promised to protect them. Yes. Victor nodded miserably. Jonathan begged her. The room remained silent. He feared Reginald would search forever. Reginald looked stunned. Why? Victor's voice softened. Because Jonathan couldn't bear to explain. The truth about Clara. The family connection. The scandal. The heartbreak. Everything. Jonathan chose exile rather than revelation. A tragic decision, but understandable. Holmes continued. Years passed. Yes. Eleanor maintained the secret. And then? Victor closed his eyes. Then she made a terrible mistake. The room grew still. Holmes resumed. The drifter's body was discovered. By Eleanor? Yes. Near the lake. The detective nodded. At first, she intended to inform the authorities. Naturally. Then she saw an opportunity. The meaning became clear. A horrifying opportunity. If the body were mistaken for Jonathan, the search would end. Questions would cease. The mystery would be closed. Eleanor planted the watch, I whispered. Exactly. Holmes's voice carried no judgment, only sadness. One desperate act. Victor nodded. She believed she was helping. Indeed. The vicar's words suddenly returned to me. Do you believe a person may commit a terrible wrong while attempting to do what is right? Now I finally understood. Eleanor had not murdered anyone. Her crime had been deception. A deception maintained for years. A deception that gradually consumed her conscience. Holmes continued. The skeleton remained undiscovered until now. Yes. Reginald stared at the floor. My God. The years passed, Holmes said quietly, and Eleanor carried the burden alone. The confession, the fear, the tears, the hidden visits to the garden. Everything suddenly made sense. She had not been protecting herself. She had been protecting Jonathan and Clara, and perhaps even Reginald. Yet the weight of the lie eventually became unbearable. Holmes held up Eleanor's final note. I can no longer bear the burden of what I have done. The statement is perfectly accurate. She never confessed murder, I said. No. Only guilt. Exactly. The distinction changed everything. Eleanor had allowed an innocent dead man to become a false identity. She had manipulated evidence. She had concealed the truth. And she had lived with that knowledge for nearly a decade. No wonder she had grown frightened. No wonder she had cried. No wonder she had sought counsel from the vicar. The miracle was that she endured the burden for so long. Reginald finally spoke. His voice sounded hollow. My brother is alive. Almost certainly. The words echoed through the room. Alive. After 8 years. The mystery's greatest assumption had been false from the beginning. Yet one final question remained. The threatening notes. The hidden searches. The intruder. The missing box. The mysterious visitor. I voiced the concern immediately. What about the recent events? Holmes smiled faintly. The final piece. He turned toward Victor. You may explain. Victor sighed heavily. I suppose I must. He removed a folded letter from inside his coat. I received this 6 weeks ago. Holmes nodded. I suspected as much. Victor handed it over. The handwriting was unfamiliar, yet the message proved astonishing. Reginald gasped. I felt my own pulse quicken. The letter was signed. Jonathan Ashcombe. Silence filled the room. Victor spoke quietly. He contacted me. Recently? Yes. From where? I don't know. Victor shook his head. The letter gave no location, but he was alive. Yes. The revelation explained everything. The searches. The panic. The attempts to recover evidence. Someone had learned Jonathan was still alive. Someone feared the secret would emerge. Holmes nodded. And that someone was not a murderer. No. A protector. Exactly. Victor rubbed his tired eyes. I searched Eleanor's room. You did. I found the box. You did. I removed it. Holmes nodded. To protect Jonathan. Yes. The threatening note. The false death. The secret movements. Everything suddenly aligned. Victor had not been trying to obstruct justice. He had been trying to preserve a promise made years earlier, a promise to two people who wished to remain hidden. Reginald looked overwhelmed. You mean all this time? Victor nodded. Jonathan was alive. The room fell silent. At length Holmes spoke. There remains only one matter. What? I asked. The final confession. He looked toward the document in his hand, then toward the gathered faces. Eleanor Briggs wanted the truth discovered. The detective's voice softened, not because she feared punishment, but because she feared dying before correcting her mistake. A profound stillness followed, and in that moment I felt a deep admiration for the woman at the center of the mystery. Not because she had been perfect, far from it, but because she had spent years carrying a burden that should never have belonged to one person alone. Her confession had not exposed a killer, it had exposed a conscience, and yet Holmes's explanation was not entirely complete. One final revelation remained. A revelation concerning the mysterious visitor, the hidden photograph, and Jonathan Ashcombe himself. And before the night ended, Sherlock Holmes would finally reveal where the missing man had gone, and why he had chosen never to return. Chapter 14. The Last Truth Beneath the Stone. The storm had passed by morning. For the first time since our arrival at Blackthorn Manor, sunlight touched the ancient estate. The winter sky remained pale, but the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the house for days seemed noticeably lighter. Yet one final mystery remained. We knew now that Jonathan Ashcombe had not been murdered. We knew that Clara Whitmore had vanished voluntarily. We knew Eleanor Briggs had spent years protecting their secret and had ultimately confessed, not to killing a man, but to perpetuating a lie. Still, Holmes had not answered every question. As we gathered once more in the library, I voiced the concern. There are still gaps. Naturally, Holmes replied. Several, in fact. Reginald Ashcombe nodded. The visitor? Yes. The photograph? Yes. And Jonathan's letter? Holmes smiled faintly. All connected. Victor Hargreaves sat quietly nearby. The exhaustion of recent days showed plainly upon his face. At length Holmes rose. The final explanation begins with the photograph. He removed the image of Clara Whitmore from his pocket. The same photograph that had arrived anonymously. The same photograph bearing the words, "She knew first." Holmes placed it upon the table. Who sent it? I asked. Jonathan. The answer startled no one more than Victor. What? Holmes nodded. Jonathan sent the photograph. How can you know? Because of the wall. He pointed toward the image. The initials, CWJA, carved into the stone. The photograph was not intended to identify Clara. Then what? It was intended to identify a location. The realization dawned immediately. The garden wall. Precisely, Holmes continued. Jonathan knew Eleanor would understand. Understand what? The reference. The east garden, the third stone, the hidden cavity. Everything connected. Holmes's voice grew thoughtful. For years, Jonathan maintained indirect contact with Eleanor. Reginald stared. You mean they communicated? Rarely. How? Through intermediaries. Victor lowered his gaze. Me. Holmes nodded. Among others. The mystery of the elderly visitor now became clear. The limping stranger who had met Eleanor shortly before her death. Not Jonathan himself. A messenger. Someone carrying correspondence. Someone helping maintain the fragile chain connecting the past to the present. The envelope Eleanor burned? I asked. A warning. About what? Her health. Victor answered quietly. Jonathan learned she was dying. Silence followed. Eleanor's heart condition had worsened. Victor nodded. He feared she would die without revealing the truth. The final confession, the hidden journal, the instructions to the vicar, everything suddenly fit together. Eleanor had begun preparing for the end. Not because someone threatened her, because time itself threatened her. Holmes folded his hands behind his back. The most important clue was never the confession. No? I asked. It was the wording. He recited it from memory. The truth lies beneath the third stone. Notice what she did not write. I considered. She never wrote where Jonathan was. Exactly. She never accused anyone. Exactly. She never described a crime. Precisely. Holmes smiled. Eleanor was directing us toward evidence. The cavity, the key, the hidden archive, the documents. Not a corpse, not a murderer, a truth. The distinction was crucial. Reginald sat quietly for several moments, then asked the question lingering in every mind. Where is my brother? A profound silence followed. Holmes looked toward Victor. The latter sighed. I suppose there is no reason to hide it now. No, Holmes agreed. There is not. Victor reached into his coat. Slowly he produced a final letter. Unlike the others, this one bore a recent date. Only 6 months old. He handed it to Reginald. The older man unfolded it with trembling hands. As his eyes moved across the page, tears appeared. The room remained silent. At length he lowered the letter. He's alive, Victor nodded. Yes. Where? A small coastal town in Portugal. The answer seemed almost absurdly simple after so many years of mystery. Portugal. Not London. Not America. Not some hidden estate. Merely a distant town where 2 people could live quietly and anonymously. He married Clara? I asked. Victor smiled sadly. Years ago. Reginald closed his eyes. For several moments he could not speak. Then, children? 2. The silence that followed felt entirely different from those that had come before. Not fear, not uncertainty, relief. A burden nearly a decade old had finally lifted. Holmes moved toward the window. Outside, sunlight illuminated the frost-covered grounds, the east garden, the stone path, the place where the mystery had begun. At length Reginald rose. Why didn't he come home? The question carried neither anger nor bitterness, only sadness. Victor answered softly, because he believed you would hate him. Reginald shook his head immediately. No. I know. But he didn't. The tragedy of the affair lay not in murder, nor betrayal, nor greed. It lay in misunderstanding. Jonathan had fled because he could not face the truth. Reginald had mourned because he never knew it. Eleanor had suffered because she tried to protect everyone at once, and Clara had sacrificed her entire life because she loved a man she believed she must leave. Holmes finally turned from the window. The greatest mysteries are rarely criminal. The room became still. They are human. No one argued. Because after everything we had witnessed, the statement felt unquestionably true. Later that afternoon, we departed Blackthorn Manor. As our carriage rolled away beneath the pale winter sun, I glanced back one final time. The manor stood quiet against the horizon, its secrets finally uncovered, its ghosts finally laid to rest. For some distance Holmes remained silent. Then, without warning, he lit his pipe. A disappointing case. I stared at him. Disappointing? Certainly. I laughed. We uncovered hidden identities, secret archives, false deaths, buried evidence, and a disappearance spanning 8 years. Quite so. And you call that disappointing? Holmes exhaled a stream of smoke. There was no master criminal. Not every mystery requires one. He considered this, then smiled faintly. No. For a time we watched the countryside pass. At last I asked, what became of Eleanor Briggs's final confession? Holmes gazed thoughtfully through the window. A confession should accomplish something, and hers did. Indeed. Justice? Holmes shook his head. Something rarer. What? His eyes drifted toward the distant horizon. Forgiveness. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then the train carried us onward toward London, toward Baker Street, toward future mysteries, and thus ended the curious affair known in my records as the housekeeper's final confession, a case that began with the appearance of a crime and ended with the revelation of a deeply human sorrow. Of all Sherlock Holmes's investigations, few demonstrated more clearly that the most powerful secrets are not those hidden beneath stones or locked within archives. They are those buried within the hearts of ordinary people. The end.